Hey guys, welcome back to Suburban Ranch. If you're looking to replace the brakes on a 2010 to 2015 Lexus RX350, you found the right video. All right guys, so let's take a look at what we're going to be installing today. So we picked up this Powerstop Evolution brake pad and rotor kit from Rock Auto. So it comes with everything you need. So we've got front brake pads, front rotors, rear brake pads, rear rotors. It even comes with some caliper grease as well. So this is the kit that we ordered. All the part numbers are shown here. We'll link them in the description below. And then over here we have all of the tools that you're going to need for this job. So a little bit of PB Blaster or really any kind of penetrating oil. Always a good idea to have when you're working on brakes. I've got a little bit more brake part lubricant, although the kit did come with some. We've got an old coat hanger here. This will be useful for when we need to hang the caliper up so that we don't hang it from the line. I've got a couple of different torque wrenches here. Really, you can get away with just one torque wrench. The highest torque spec we're going to be dealing with today is only around 80 foot-pounds, so nothing too crazy. 3/8 ratchet with a small extension, a 14 and a 17 millimeter socket. I also have a 3/8 breaker bar just to make it a little bit easier to break loose some of those caliper bolts. Again, you probably don't really need the breaker bar, but it's nice to have. I have a little 3-pound sledgehammer to break loose the rotors themselves, and a caliper compressing tool. So that's all you need, really not too many tools to get this job done. Okay, so the first step to the brake job is to remove the cap from your master cylinder. You're going to want to allow space for the fluid to expand and come back up into the master cylinder as you compress your calipers to install the new pads. So go ahead and just pop that cap off. And now we'll head underneath the car. So step one is to lift the car. I'm going to lift from these pinch welds here. So these are the jacking points on the car. There's one at each corner just inside of the wheels. You can use a floor jack, really any kind of jack that you want. You'll also want to put a jack stand under the car to secure it. So I actually did forget to show you guys one tool. That's the socket to remove the lug nuts. I think nominally these lug nuts are 21 millimeter, but I always find that a 13/16 fits a little bit better. Comment below and let me know what you guys use. Sometimes the wheel needs a little bit of convincing. Step one, we're going to have to remove this rotor at some point, and you can see all of this corrosion here around the hub ring. So go ahead and get your penetrating oil, spray this down. You can rotate it around. Spray it in these two holes here as well. You can spray it around the lug nuts. Just anywhere you can get some penetrating oil in. That way, while we remove the caliper, this can all do some work for us. Next up, we're going to remove the caliper. So we'll do that by removing these two 14 millimeter bolts. With those two bolts removed, you should be able to slide the caliper off. There we go. And I'm just going to kind of hook it right here on the coil spring. And this, it kind of will just sit here, but we're going to be doing some banging later. So let me grab my coat hanger. And basically we'll just loop it through the hole in the back of the caliper. And we'll just tie this off to that coil spring. We don't want that to fall and hang from the brake hose. Okay, next up, I want to remove this caliper bracket. So it's held on with two 17 millimeter bolts. Those are a little bit tighter. So now that I've got them broken loose, I should be able to use my ratchet. Okay, so we've got those two bolts removed. We should be able to lift our caliper bracket off now. So next up, we're going to use our 3-pound sledgehammer and try to break this rotor loose. We'll be hitting around the outside perimeter, both from the outside of the vehicle and then a little bit from the inside of the vehicle. Make your bets now with how many hits it takes to break this loose. I'm gonna go with 15. All right, so here is a look at that bracket off of the car. So the first thing I want to do, these two pins are floating pins. So you can kind of see that in the video. So those need to be able to slide in and out. The caliper actually bolts to these two pins. So they have a little rubber grommet. We can kind of just work that rubber grommet off of the pin. There it comes. And we can pull these pins out. So the idea here is I'm going to wipe off all the old grease and apply some new grease on these pins. So we'll use the grease that came with the kit. And then we'll work the pin back in. Just work it back and forth a few times. Wipe the grease back in. All right. And then I'll work the rubber seal back up over the lip of this pin. Oh yeah, feels great. This one is much harder to move in and out. This one is much more free floating. So we'll go ahead and do this one now. So there we go. Both pins are now freshly greased. All right, so the next step is to install our new pads and hardware onto the bracket. So we'll start out by removing the old pads. So these will just slide out. So we'll just push those out with our hands. And we should note how thin these are. So this car actually has 160,000 miles on it. You can see the pad material is pretty much all the way down to the backing plate. Compared to the thickness of a new pad, it's a huge, huge difference. So these pads are completely worn out. And we'll slide out the other pad as well. And that pad's also quite thin. All right, so now we're down to just the bracket. There are a bunch of different retainer clips here. Our new kit came with all new retainer clips. So basically what we're going to do is just pop these clips out and install our new clips. So again, these should mostly pop out by hand, or they might need a little convincing with the screwdriver. So there's a look at the old clip and the new clip, and you can see they're identical except the new one is shiny. So to install this, basically it's just got two spring-loaded little wings on it. So we'll just slide it into place. There we go. So there's one, and we'll have to do that 4 times. So there's 2 on this side and 2 on this side. There we go. All new clips. Another thing you'll notice about the old brake pads is this extra clip on the end, and this is actually the squealer. So when the brake pad gets down far enough, this will make contact with the rotor and actually start making noise. And when you first get your brake pads out of the box, you might notice, hey, it doesn't have that clip, but they actually did supply it. So it just clips onto your new brake pads. So we'll just clip it onto the end here. There we go, so there's one. And here's the second one. And I just put that in the same orientation as the old brake pads. Okay, so you might be thinking, great, let's put the pads back into the bracket. But you'd be wrong. We need to lubricate all of these contact points. So these new clips that we put in, we want to apply some of this brake grease at all of the contact points where it's going to make contact with the new brake pads. So we'll apply to all 4 of these clips a little bit of grease, and to the ends of our brake pads. So this little horn that sticks out, we'll get a little bit of grease on all of these contact points. And if you're not sure what you should grease, just slide it in, take a look at what's touching, and grease those points. The next step is to install the pads into this bracket. You can actually install the bracket onto the car and install the pads later, but I'm going to go ahead and do it now so that you guys can get a look at what this looks like off of the car. I think it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. So here is one pad. I'm going to install the squealer side first. So these are just little spring-loaded clips that we've installed. So I'll get this side started by my thumb. Okay, so that side's started, and then I'll push the second side in. So there's one pad installed. Flip it around. Again, I'll start with the squealer side of the pad. Get that started into the clip, there we go. And then install the second side. So there's a look at both pads installed into the bracket. I've left a pretty nice gap here to slide over the rotor, and so we should be able to just bolt this right back onto the car. So next up, we're going to install our new rotors. So these are the Powerstop rotors, and they have a coating on them, so they call this Geomet. And so usually with new rotors, you spray them down with brake cleaner and you wipe all the oil off. These are shipped with absolutely no oil on them, and it has this rust protective coating. And so living in Iowa, I thought it'd be a good idea because, you know, if you just buy bare rotors, they're covered in rust in no time, as you can kind of tell from the underside of this car. So we got the coated rotors. We'll see how those hold up, but also you don't have to clean them off when you install them. So installation is as simple as just sliding it on. Almost forgot, guys, there's an extra hole in these rotors. The old ones had it too. And there's a rubber plug. I just popped this out of the old rotor, and we'll just pop that into the new rotor. There we go. The purpose of that rubber plug is actually you can pop it out and adjust the parking brake. So the parking brake is like a drum brake inside of this rotor. All right, so we are now ready to reinstall our bracket with our loaded brake pads. So I'll slide this over our new rotor. I'm going to go ahead and slide these in so that they're making contact with the rotor, so they're as narrow as possible, and that'll make it easier to get the caliper on later. We'll go ahead and torque these caliper mounting bolts to 58 foot-pounds. Okay, so the next step, if we take a look at our caliper, there's no way that's going to slide over the new brake pads because they're so much thicker, and we can see how far this piston is extended. We're basically going to have to push this piston all the way back almost to the surface of the caliper itself. So I've got a little caliper compressing tool here. Usually I like to slide an old brake pad in to push against the caliper itself or the piston itself. But in this case, it's just not quite thick enough to do that. So I'm going to push gently here on the piston, just back it up a little bit until I can slide an old brake pad in there. And this is why we took the cap off the master cylinder, because we're actually forcing fluid back up the lines. I'm going to slide an old brake pad in there so that I can push on the brake pad rather than the piston itself. All right, so we've pushed our piston pretty much all the way back, and you can see this dust boot is now a little bit weird because it was extended all the way out. So what we'll want to do is work that dust boot back into position. So it should have like a little fold in it, like a double fold, like a double pleat, kind of like it is right there. So we'll see if we can get that all the way around. This usually takes a little bit of finesse. There we go. You can see now we've got the double pleat all the way around, and now it's all sitting behind the piston itself, or to say it a different way, the piston is proud of the dust boot, so you don't want the dust boot resting right on the brake pad itself. So we're able to tuck that all back in, and it's ready to be reinstalled now. We're ready to reinstall our caliper. You can see I applied a little bit more brake grease to the back of the brake pads where the caliper is going to touch. So I did that both on the back and on the front brake pad. So now that we've got our piston compressed, we should be able to slide our caliper right over the brake pads, and they'll line right up with the holes on our bracket. And we'll torque our caliper bolts to 20 foot-pounds. And the last step is to replace the tire. And the final torque for the lug nuts is 76 foot-pounds. Okay, now on to the front brakes. We'll start by removing the wheel. Okay, start out by spraying our penetrating oil. Okay, so we'll start by removing the two 14mm bolts holding the caliper on. All right, so I've looped the coat hanger around the coil spring. I'm now ready to lift the caliper off, and I'll have a place to hang it once I have it off. There we go. And I'll loop my coat hanger through one of the back holes here. I'm going to go ahead and remove these two spring clips that spread our pads apart. We're going to have to actually reuse these clips. We did not get new ones with the new pads. So these just go into holes on the sides of the pads themselves. So there's one and two. Next up, we're going to remove the two 17mm bolts that hold the caliper bracket on. So I'll break those loose. And then we can remove the caliper bracket. Okay guys, time to remove the old rotor. I'm gonna go with 13 hits this time. I think I've got it. That was like cheating. Here's a look at that front bracket off the car. The process here is going to be exactly the same as what we did in the rear. So we're going to grease these slides. We're going to remove the old pads, remove the old clips, install the new clips, grease all of the contact points, and reinstall the new pads. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and compress the caliper while we have everything apart. So this is a dual piston caliper, so I'll kind of just go back and forth with my little compressor tool. And no issues with the dust boots in the front. Okay, so here is a look at our new front rotor. All right, so we are now ready to reinstall our caliper bracket. We've got it fully loaded with the new pads, new clips, and everything greased. We'll slide that over the rotor. And we'll torque the bolts to 77 foot-pounds. Before we reinstall our caliper, we'll reinstall these spring clips. So they just go into the holes in the pads. There's one. And there's two. And finally, we're ready to reinstall our caliper. All right, last up, we'll torque these caliper mounting bolts to 25 foot-pounds. The pin here is spinning, so I'm gonna have to use a second wrench to hold the pin. And the last step is to reinstall the wheel. All right guys, there you have it. The brakes are all installed. The last step is to go out and bed the brakes. Powerstop recommends to take the car out and do 30 slowdowns from 30 down to 5 miles per hour. If you enjoyed this content, please do like and subscribe. We've got a lot more content coming.